Hello, it's Duncan. How many folk singers does it take to fix a bug? Returning to the TDD Gilded Rose codebase, the first thing I find is that I can't actually run the app on my computer. Programs are generally stable and predictable, but anything can break when its environment changes, and the environment is constantly changing. We try to set up tests to give us feedback that we have a problem, but inevitably things slip through the cracks, and if there are no cracks, then our tests are probably costing too much. Today it takes 5 minutes to diagnose the issue, a minute to fix it, 5 more minutes to work out how it happened, and a final 5 to fix the fix so it's less likely to be a problem again. Coincidentally, 5 is also the number of folk singers. 1 to fix the bug, and 4 more to sing about how good things were before it was fixed. What was once a technology now wants a relationship with me. Returning to the TDD Gilded Rose production code after a break, I don't really remember how to run everything locally. So let's see whether I left myself any clues. There's a README file here, let's have a look. And it says setup requires Java 21, start Postgres in Docker. And IntelliJ helpfully provides little run arrows here for bash commands inside Markdown, so let's try running that. Bad start, db/startdb.show no file or directory. Yes, we had a db directory, but that then got confusing when we pulled out a database module. So I think I renamed the db directory to scripts. Let's have a look. Yes, there we are, startdb.show. Well, we might as well update the documentation to be right while we're here. So that should be scripts startdb. And now run that again. And where are we? Unable to get image Postgres 15.2. Cannot connect to the Docker daemon. Is the Docker daemon running? Oh, no, it isn't. Hold on. I've run the Docker desktop app, but I seem to have lost it into a menu bar somewhere. There we are. Click on that. Go to the dashboard. And here we are. What was once a technology now wants a relationship with me, but I think I can just skip. I don't want that. Thank you very much. Okay, let's try again. Script startdb.show. Oh, there we go. And we seem to be running a test database and a local database. Let's just remind ourselves why. We ran script startdb.show. Startdb.show is here, and it runs docker compose, passing it to this file here and up. And this file here says I want 2 containers, one called local database and one called test database. They're pretty much the same, except that the local database runs on 5432 and the test database runs on 5433. Oh, and the local database has a persistent volume. There it is. Whereas the test database that we only use for running tests doesn't have a volume because it doesn't need to persist anything between tests. Okay then, I think I understand that. What's next? Run most of the tests. Okay, I'm going to give that a go, but not here. I'm going to bring up a terminal, and in fact another tab in the terminal, and I'm going to run /Gradle w clean test -- console equals plain, just so we can see everything is going. Pull that up and let's have a look. Okay, flyway migrations, things and things and things. Lots of things hopefully happening in parallel. And we have run everything apparently in 13 seconds, which is splendid. Okay then, so we pass all our tests. Let's see whether we can run it locally. This says we need to initialize the local database, and I guess that's going to be scripts migrate dev. Let's run that, and that's successful. Good. And now, I don't think I've ever shown you this before, but we had this populate main, which populates the database with test data. Now at the moment that says source test Java populate main, I guess that's now moved into app. Let's have a look. Source test Java populate main. There you are. So we'll change this to app/source main, etc. Okay, so here's that populate main. Let's see what it does. It creates an app and a random, and then it says let's load the stock list from wherever it's loaded from, I guess by default the database, and then we're going to delete items with IDs of all the IDs we get from the stock list we just loaded. And then we're going through item data and adding each one of those things to the database. Where's item data? Here it is. And back up here it looks like we're just adding in random numbers of sell by dates and random quantities. Okay, so it looks like that's just used for demos, but that's fine because that's what I want to do next. So let's run that. And okay, we have an error and it is caused by relation public items does not exist. Well, tellingly, that doesn't say the database doesn't exist or that we can't connect to it. It says that we don't have public items. Now, IntelliJ comes with some decent database tools, and I think I have a connection set up. Here we are. We've got Gilded Rose dev and test. And it's the dev database, the one on a developer's local machine, that we're interested in. Let's have a look at that. Refresh it. And see what we see. There's public, and it is empty. That's a bit perplexing because we did just run this migrate dev.sh, which claimed to have succeeded. Let's see what that does. That's in scripts, migrate dev. Here it is. And what does that do? It runs Gradle w flyway migrate, having set the JDBC URL to be a database with the right port number for our dev rather than our test database. I think I'm going to try running that on the command line sort of manually. So we'll take this thing here, we'll go here and we'll say run that. See what we get. Okay, that's still successful apparently. Now this flyway migrate has now ended up, I think, in database build.gradle.kts. Ah yes, there we are, and here is our provider's environment variable JDBC URL, which matches this thing here, I hope. We can find out by going to the end of this line and saying also println and rerunning our build. Things take time, and here it is, JDBC Postgres localhost 5432, and going back to our Docker Compose, 5432 is indeed our local database, the one we're calling dev rather than test. So we appear to be configuring things right. Let's see where that's used. There we are in this flyway configuration block. Flyway doesn't say there are any issues, but nothing has happened. And again, we know there actually is a database running for that database because we can query it in this window here. While we're in this window, we do think we ran tests in our test database, which suggests that it has been initialized. Let's have a look. Gilded Rose, public, tables. Here's our items, whereas we're not seeing it here. And I note that we also have a table for the flyway schema history here, but we don't have one of those for our dev database. So we're running the flyway migrate task, but it's not creating its schema history and also not adding our items table. That's confusing. Going to try running migrate dev again, see what it tells us. Still claims to be successful, but I wonder what task it's actually running. Let's say again ---- console equals plain so that it's forced to tell us. So it said configure project database, but it hasn't actually said that it's run the flyway migrate task. I'm getting a nasty feeling about this. Let's go back to our build and remind ourselves. Here we are. Task names flyway migrate, input files db migration, outputs build generated source Duke main. Let's have a look what I was doing then. That was changed when I moved the db items into its own sub-project, not when I edited this code in a different place. That's annoying. But I do seem to remember this was an attempt to stop flyway migrate being run on every build. When we specify inputs and outputs to a Gradle task, especially with files and directories, then Gradle looks at the last modified to the inputs and outputs, and if the outputs are up to date with respect to the inputs, it doesn't bother to run the task. Thinking it through then, the thing that I did before all this was to run Gradle w clean test. That will make it that this output is more recent than the input, and flyway migrate won't be run. I think I could test this hypothesis by making one of these migration files date more recent. So let's remember that. We'll go back to our terminal and we'll say I want to touch, which is to say set the date and time to current date and time, database, source main, migration, and we'll just pick one of those files. And now let's try running our migrate dev. I'm not sure that's helped. So we're looking at database and refresh this. Public, still nothing. Let's try removing the output instead. So we'll take that thing and we'll say rm -rf database build. Make sure that does exist. We'll take a pause as we're doing rm -rf to make sure that that is actually what we want to do. I think it's safe because it's only generated sources. We'll do that. And then once again, our migrate dev. Aha! And now we see flyway migrate is being run. And we're done. And now we can look in dev, refresh, and we have tables, flyway schema history, and items. Hooray! So I think that might mean that we can rerun populate main. Let's have a go. Well, there are a few warnings, but I think that's all good. Let's have a look in our items. Ah, there they are. Brilliant. And now we can return to our README and see that it says run the app, which is source main Java, but I guess it's probably app. Source main Java main.kt. Have a look for that. Here it is, and we will run that. It starts up nice and quickly. We can look here and see that it's running on port 80. So if we return to our terminal and say open http://localhost:80. Oh, AI is getting in the way. Yes, that's what I typed, AI. But off screen, I'll bring it in Firefox. We have our running app. Hooray. So I think there are two things to do now. One is to go to our README and work out how to make migratedev.show actually work. And the other is to work out why I've only just discovered that problem. We'll tackle the first one first, because I think that I should just be able to do a clean in here. That's a bit tedious, but maybe it'll get things running. Actually, no, it won't, because it will run all our unit tests against our dev database. So I think probably we need to do clean in a separate step. So we'll move that into there. And then how can we test that? Well, we can go back to our database here. We can drop all the tables. So now we're back in the position before Flyway ran. And now let's see whether our new migrate dev is going to work. Things certainly happened there. We will refresh this and our tables are back. I don't like this solution, but at least it's got us running. Now I'm going to go away and work out how things are working since I made these changes and why they stopped working now. Okay then, I've something of a theory. Here's the Docker desktop containers view. You can see here our compose stack. It's called scripts, and it has the local database container and the test database container. And it's called scripts because the Docker compose file is in a directory called scripts. Given the convention of calling the Docker compose file Docker compose, if we didn't name the stack after the directory containing the Docker compose, then all the stacks would just have the same name. What's interesting is that I don't have a stack for the previous version where that Docker compose file was in a directory called db. And that's because quite recently I came in here and did a bit of garbage collection. I'm reasonably convinced though that I haven't rerun Gilded Rose since I did, which on reflection was silly, but is what it is. The other thing I think I should have done was to rerun this migrate dev script, or at least the previous version, having made these changes to Flyway migrate. Although I suspect if I had run it, it would have succeeded, because the previous Docker compose volume was there, I would have had to clear out the volumes first. So while I think my change to migrate dev here is going to get things working, I'd really like to find a solution that makes it less likely that I'll make that mistake again. The problem, as it so often is in software, is using this Flyway migrate task here for two things and forgetting the second of those. So perhaps a better way of doing this would be to have a separate task that we don't configure like this. I don't know how to do that, but maybe our AI assistant does. Let's say I need a copy of the Flyway migrate task that does the same thing with a different name and no inputs and outputs configured. Okay then, it says we can use tasks register Flyway migrate simple, depends on Flyway migrate. Depends on here, it says that Flyway migrate must be run before generate Duke. That feels very different, but let's try it. We'll take this, copy it from here, put it in there, and now let's go back to our database. Nuke Gilded Rose dev, so we will drop the tables. There we go. We're going back to migrate dev. We'll say we want to undo those changes that would work and call Flyway migrate simple. We can run that from here. Okay, and now look in our database, refresh, and as I expected, that didn't work. Back to AI Assistant. That seems to run flyaway migrate before flyaway migrate. Simple, not inherit its behavior. In fact, before I go on, I'm going to take this line here, copy it from there, and we'll put it in here with our minus minus console equals plain. Okay, so what ran? Flyaway migrate. Well, it went to run, but it didn't run because it was up to date, and so flyaway migrate simple was. So I think I'm right then. Let's send that. That's much more plausible. Let's take that thing, copy it back to our build.gradle, take this thing like that, and now we'll try the same thing from the command line. Things happened, looks plausible, back to database, refresh. There are our tables and things are working. Brilliant. So then, a little bit of tidying up. I think we'll call this flyaway migrate dev. Now we've got our own task, I think we can hardcode this test JDBC URL. We don't really have a single point of truth here between these port numbers. They're hard-coded in here and they're hard-coded in our Docker Compose. We might do better, I suppose, but I think I'm just going to take that like that. Now go to our migrate dev and take this thing back to build, put that into there with some quotes. Now then migrate dev can say flyaway migrate dev. It doesn't need to set the URL because that's now inside our build file. Docker Compose doesn't need any changes. This build is looking good. So what I think I'm going to do is go back to my README, clear out absolutely everything and see whether it now works. What does it mean to clear out absolutely everything? Well, we can do that from Docker. So I'm going to delete the stack. It's gone. I'm going to take the volumes. This old dbpg volume is dead to me. It can go, as is that one. Delete that. These appear to be the ones for the tests, so I think we can get rid of those. They're unnamed. So now we have no containers and no volumes. Our Docker run here has shut itself down. I think that's what we want. Kill that, kill that. We'll check with this that we don't have a connection. No, we don't. And here we don't have a connection. No, we don't. Good. Right. So, script.db, up and running. Splendid. Now we want our clean test build. That will take some time. But passes everything good. Now we will migrate our dev database. If that works, then we can look in the database view here, refresh that, and we have tables with items and schema history. Fantastic. Run app populate main. That's up here somewhere. Run that. Good. And then finally we will run main, which turns out to be running all this time. Return to our browser and refresh. There we go. A triumph. So then, by way of a review, let's check that in. What has changed? Well, something crashed. Let's delete that. We've updated our README. It might have been nice had IntelliJ warned us that this script didn't exist, but that's okay. Apart from that, everything is in order, again, except for some paths here that have gone wonky. Perhaps if we check the box looking for text paths when we move things, it would have caught this. Our migrate dev here is now a lot simpler and doesn't depend on piggybacking on the flyaway migrate task. And this flyaway migrate dev, well, it can have its own version of the JDBC URL, so that simplifies that first bit. And then down here, registering a new version of the flyaway migrate task turns out to be quite easy, although AI Assistant did give us a bum steer, as often happens. Looking at this, actually, I wonder whether this flyaway configuration block here is worthwhile at all. But I'm getting hungry and you must be sick to death of Gradle, so I'm not going to do that now. I'm just going to ask the AI for a message. I think that's wordy, but okay. Splendid. In most real projects I've been on, when you join as a new developer, it can take a couple of days to get the build running on your machine. It's a sort of rite of passage. Sometimes things go smoothly, but normally there's at least one thing that either doesn't work on your machine because your machine is different in some subtle way to all the others, or as in this case, the instructions would have worked had you joined the project 2 weeks ago, but don't now because of some subtle state that's become ingrained in every other developer's machine but yours. It's a sad but true fact that our first experience with the codebase is often banging our heads against trying to get it building, and the existing developer's first experience of a new team member is then begging for help trying to understand what's going on. Forget about writing code, the first person that comes to me with an AI system that can just build my software can take my money. Talking about money, it turns out I was suckered by CraftComp's false deadline. They'll still take your money to come to the workshop that Nat Price and I are running in Budapest in May. We sold out at KotlinConf, but this will be a much smaller group, which is great for workshops. So sign up while you still can, which I suspect is any time before the 28th of May. Oh, and don't forget to like, subscribe, etc. You know the drill.